These three spellbinding silver supercars are all linked by the amazing GT1 class of the mid-90s. We're at the famous Millbrook Proving Ground, and these cars have been brought together with the help of DK Engineering and a couple of very generous owners, to whom we owe huge thanks. If you're subscribed to the Carfection channel, then you'll know that in the first film in this series we drove the inimitable McLaren F1, the car that rewrote the supercar rulebook and as a racing car won Le Mans at its first attempt in 1995. In this second film in the series, we're looking at the car that Porsche built to beat the McLaren, the 911 GT1. The recipe for the Porsche was conceptually simple. Norbert Singer took a 993 generation 911, chopped it in half and grafted it to the back end of a 962 Le Mans car. Thus was born the 911 GT1. This meant that unlike every other 911 up to that point, and most since, the flat six engine was not at the back, but in the middle. It was homologated in time for Le Mans in 1996 with just two road-going cars. It won the GT1 class but failed to take the overall victory at Les Arth, coming in second to a Porsche TWR prototype. It first raced in the BPR Championship at round 8 at Brands Hatch later that year. It won at a canter, again beating the McLaren F1s, but as it was racing by invitation only, it couldn't score points. For 1997, the BPR Global GT Championship became the FIA GT Championship, and the Porsche became the 911 GT1 Evo, with a new 996 style nose. This was the design given to the majority of the homologation road cars, or Strassen version, like this one, that needed to be built to satisfy the regulations. Technically, 25 were required, but it seems unlikely there were ever more than about 20. It weighs just 1150 kilos, has 536 turbocharged brake horsepower and 443 pounds-foot of torque going to the rear wheels. 0 to 62 miles an hour is a claimed 3.7 seconds, and the top speed is 192 miles an hour. The doors, however, are quite normal compared to the other two, but I suppose that's what you get for a mere £525,000, which is what this cost back in the day. Thankfully, there is at least some exposed roll cage to clamber over and make things at least a little awkward when you get in. They might be the most normal doors of the three cars here, but it's still pretty tight inside this GT1. And it's crazy because you walk up to it and obviously it's got a 996 front to it on this one because most of them had this sort of front on them. You see the carbon around the windscreen here, which kind of just tells you something slightly different. And then you get in here and it's like a 993 and a 964. These seats are 964 seats, but the dash, everything, yeah, it's very, very 993, which is a bit of a shock if you've seen the fried egg headlights at the front. Buttons though moved up to here, and there is one crucial thing that you won't find in a 993 or 964, because here normally you'd have obviously oil pressure, oil temperature, and then you'd have oil level here next to the fuel level here, but this has got a water temperature gauge because back there it's a water cooled flat six, not an air cooled, which again you might think, well, it's a 996 front, so it should be water-cooled flat six, but this is based on a 993, and this is the first, in fact, Metzger, as we know it, engine that went on to be in all those GT3s up to the end of the 997. Other things in here, well, it's the most normal, I suppose, of the three cars in terms of it feels like a road car from just looking here. If you don't look out of the windscreen and see those enormous, great wing mirrors, which look like sort of a combination of flying saucers and I suppose the heads of a modern golf club driver. The gear lever nice and high up here, and then you've got this stiff linkage going straight back through the bulkhead here, and it's really, wow, just it feels as direct as it looks, to be perfectly honest. The pedals, well, they're canted over towards the middle a bit, familiar sort of pedals, but you've got the rough grip, sort of sandpaper on the clutch and brake, just to give you a bit more grip. Very race car. It's obviously difficult to get into because you've got this to clamber over here. This has just gone through a big restoration, so hence it's still got the plastic on there to protect it. Key, like the McLarens, fairly mundane, I suppose. We've got the immobiliser here as well, and obviously slots in just over here, always famously on the outside so that when you did a Le Mans start, then you can jump in and it's right there. It's nice and easy access. You don't have to fumble around this side of the steering column at all. Obviously, being a Porsche, it is well, vaguely practical, I suppose. There's no luggage space in the front. That's all taken up with gubbins and strut braces and fans, and you can get to it just by what looks like a sort of almost little choke down here. There is a boot, which is done by a button just down here, which you hear some electrical motors whir away, and it's, yeah, you fit a bit of luggage in there. It's only enough for a long weekend, a week perhaps if you packed lightly. As well as the luggage space, there's also some extra pads for the seats in there. To open the full rear clamshell, then you've got this tool here, which slots down there, and then you pull it back and then it all just cants back to reveal the engine behind.
Yes, I was quite nervous pulling that back, and somewhere on that clamshell will be a couple of numbers. Here's James Cottingham of DK Engineering to explain.
So the race cars, the shells, have a HEG number, which is, you can imagine they were delivered 30 993 Targa shells, and they built 30 shells to then be clothed, and each one had a number effectively starting from 101 right up to 135. And so 101 to 109 are the race cars, you know, the first race cars, the first iteration race cars. And then there's a bit of a gap, which they saved for reshells.
Right.
So I'm not clear if they built those 10 cars between 110 and 120, but certainly there are some cars out there with those numbers, because 107, for example, was replaced with a replacement tub 117, but people just always knew that was a chassis number. But I don't think even the Porsche experts, the modern day historic Porsche experts who buy and sell these cars until recently, until a friend of mine sort of said to me, I think this is what's going on, and we really researched it, and I pointed out to them that that's what that chassis number is. Your race car 107 is because the HEG number or HEG number is 107, and etc. etc.
So which number is that?
So this car is 126 from memory, but it's chassis 5.
Right.
So road car chassis 5. So roughly they start, so 101 to 109 were the race cars and then the spare shells, and let's say 120 was probably the prototype road car, and from then on, but obviously they're not going to be totally sequential, but they're enough. And all the bits on it are labelled up, and it's built as a race car in terms of every panel that you remove that's removable, on the back it's got that number 126 and a weight, you know, in Tipex. So the Germans, as they were building the car, you know, they painted it, they were just about to put it on the car, and they probably were having a sweepstake inside in-house or something. Well, that's just the way they did it. They were that meticulous, and they put it together and added up the numbers and hoped that this number actually matched the finished weight of the car. But it makes it very easy to track the bits and pieces across the car.
So what is this meticulously built, lightweight machine like to drive? Delicate? Flighty?
It sounds so agricultural. Of the three, it's definitely the most like a normal road car in here. But boy, it's also the easiest to get to grips with, actually. It feels like a Porsche, just a really gritty, aggressive Porsche. Oh, surfs that wave of boost. This has got the least power, just under 540 brake horsepower, and in fact the least amount of torque, but it only weighs 1150 kilos. So when all that boost comes in, boy, does it still feel quick. It feels kind of slightly 911, it feels like a light front end, but then the response from the rear, just feel the front end. You can adjust it, you feel that mid-engine balance though, it feels more faithful, lean on it through there.
Curiously, despite being mid-engined, it still feels a bit like a 911. There is something about the way the front end feels a little light through the steering, despite the huge 295 section tyres. And then you turn in, and the weight transfer is momentarily familiar. It's like a 911, but it settles quickly, rather than building a pendulous momentum like it would if it were rear-engined.
This is the one, unlike the F1, You feel like you can push this much harder, much more quickly. It feels so tough, it feels like a car designed for long races, for Le Mans. Pedal slightly offset towards the middle of the car. Clutch pedal is really heavy, fine once you're up and going, but off the line, yeah, that's tough. Love this gear shift up here. Steering, wriggling with feel. Wow. Fantastic brakes as well, really lean into them. Doesn't really sound like a flat six in many respects, it's just so gruff. It's so good, this. The ultimate 911? Quite possibly.
After the F1, where you feel like you need to be quite careful with your inputs, the GT1 feels like you can grab it by the scruff of the neck. You have confidence in that fantastic gear shift. The steering lets you know exactly what the front end is doing, and there is a much more faithful feeling to the rear. Because it's turbocharged, you can also ease yourself into the power delivery, ready yourself for the big thump of the turbos. And there is no doubt that while the McLaren feels like a road car, this feels like a road racer. Amazingly, the 911 GT1 race cars were something of a flop in 1997. You see, the regulations now favoured naturally aspirated engines and ABS was banned, both of which hampered the Porsche. What's more, McLaren brought out the new and improved long-tail version of the F1, and Mercedes, well, it brought out the car that we'll look at next time, the incredible, rule-stretching CLK GTR. Thank you once again to the very generous owners and to everyone at DK Engineering for all their help. Thank you very much for watching, and if you enjoyed the film, do please subscribe to the channel, not only so that you don't miss out on subsequent films, but as it really does help us to keep producing this sort of content.